Sometimes I feel like I can get a little bored with the repetitive nature of fantasy romances, especially fae fantasy romance. They are their own little niche trope and they follow very repetitive patterns in my opinion. So I figured today I'd share with you my top 10 non-fae romanticises. Because I do think that there are some really incredible, amazing non-fae romanticises out there. There's also some really incredible, amazing fae romanticises, but that's not what this video is about. Today's about the non-fae romantasy, which I think we all just need in our life sometimes. We need both, you know? Balance. We're gonna start at number 10 and work our way up to the top. In number 10th spot, we have A Duel with the Vampire Lord by Elise Kova. I thought this was a breath of fresh air for me. It felt very unique. Now, this is in a series of standalones, and so in this world there are fae, but I believe there's like one sentence about the fae in this book. They definitely don't take up the storyline or the plot line of this book. We just get a broader sense of the world in the other standalones at some point, and they talk about all the different creatures because each standalone within this series follows a different species falling in love. This is part of the Married to Magic series, which you can all read independently in any order. I started with this one, and it's my favorite so far. This one, we're following our main character who lives in a village whose only purpose is to keep the vampires at bay. So on full moons, vampires come out in hordes to kill the humans. So we're in a like edge village, trains all of their villagers to be soldiers essentially to keep them safe. Now our main character is the forge mistress. She's essentially the most important person in the village because she creates the weapons for them. And there is a certain type of weapon that only her family can make that defeats the vampires. Especially like Equinox is coming up where the vampire lord is gonna bridge the barrier and come join the vampire horde. And so our main character ends up going out because she realizes her brother is in danger. She ends up being captured by the vampire lord and taken back to the vampire realm. There she learns that not all that she knows is the truth. History has been changed throughout time as things go when it's spoken word and not written down. Things change and we lose parts of it and we find new parts of it, and she knows that something has to change. And she ends up teaming up with the vampire lord and his companions to help them break a curse on the vampires. I thought this was just very unique. I really liked the vampire take. I think in fantasy romance sometimes we see the vampires not being like big bads, and of course they aren't the big bad in this because we want to root for them as the love interest, but there are big bad vampires in it, and I really enjoyed those aspects. It felt a little more true to like the initial concept of a vampire. I just thought it was really unique and I really liked it for that. I would highly recommend it if you're looking for something just different than everything else you're reading. In number 9 spot, we have Flame and Sparrow by S.M. Gaither. This is a mischievous gods kind of story, like the gods are meddling in the affairs. We actually have a god and an elf in this. Essentially at one point, the elves were gods chosen. However, at some point they were forsaken and the god decided to have just more children like him, and the elves hate the gods for this. The new like minor gods. Our main character on her 18th birthday saw that her sister was murdered and she blames these middle gods. And so she sets her whole life, her whole purpose for living is to get revenge and take down the gods. Now she will do this at any cost, including making a deal with a god himself. She ends up making a deal with the fire god to kind of become one of his like servants, and she enters the realm of the gods and decides to take them down from the inside. But by the time she realizes that like not all is what it seems, there's something else going on, it's kind of a little too late and she set things in motion that cannot be taken back. And let me tell you, it's really interesting to watch those. I hesitate to recommend this book sometimes because it is really slow at the start. There is a pretty big world happening in this story, a lot of info dumping happening. There's actually a sequel series to this that was actually written first. This is technically a prequel, but you can read them in any order. They're so far apart they don't matter together, but the world is so full and lush because of those two series. So we do get a lot of like info dumping. It is a little bit drier for the first like 30% of the story, but the last half of the story is everything to me. I think the god of fire is a wonderful, wonderful love interest. I loved the things he said. There's like a found family aspect in this story, and I thought it was really interesting that the world building is around these gods and like the different levels of gods. No fae to be had here. And I thought the god realm was interesting, and just like how it all works was just very fascinating. There's also trials in this as well. So I just thought, again, like this is something unique that I hadn't read before, and I really enjoyed this. If you do enjoy this one, it's not on my top 10, but the other series set within the same world is the Shadow and Crown series. I've only read book 1, The Song of the Marked. Also gods, meddling gods. In 8th place, we have The Bridge Kingdom by Daniel L. Jensen. This one is following our main character Lana, who has been raised for one purpose and one purpose only. Her and all of her sisters were isolated and grew up training to marry the king of the Bridge Kingdom and murder him. There's no magic in this one, which I think is really fascinating. Like, the fantasy is just like the world, and it is a really cool world. Specifically the Bridge Kingdom itself. Essentially it's a kingdom you can only get to by using the bridges, and they have it like really well guarded. The enemy, which is our princess's dad, wants to take down and like own the Bridge Kingdom, but he can't find a way across this bridge to take them down, so he sets his daughters on this mission. The opening chapters of this were really interesting, seeing what Lana has to go through to get this position, and then we just like watch what happens through the Bridge Kingdom, and you kind of like learn, like, it would be so hard to go assassinate someone, but like have to become part of their life first, because you would learn about all their friends and who they are and all of that, and maybe fall in love with them and then have to betray them at some point. This is a duology. I loved the second book even more than the first book, but I just like really also thought this was interesting. I liked that there was no magic in it for romantasy. Like, it still felt very fantasy enough for me, but there is no like abracadabra. And I really enjoyed this one. This is a special edition from Dirty Diction Fiction. In 7th spot, we have Blood and Steel, or the Legends of Thesmar series. I have read most of them, by Helen Schuer, and this follows war swords. This is really interesting. Again, I thought this was just like unique to the fantasy romance sphere. This whole list is full of things that I think refreshed my love of fantasy romance, because they didn't necessarily follow all the same standards of what we've come to know and what we've come to love in a fae romance. We're following two characters. This is two POVs. We get the female character and the male POV in this. And we're following Althea, who lives in a world where there's been a prophecy that a woman will wield a blade and the shadows will come. This has been taken to think that if women are soldiers or like fight to defend at all, they will bring the shadow creatures to them. The shadow creatures like this big bad that come from beyond a veil, and they have to like take them down. And so women are just like not allowed weapons. They're not allowed to do anything like that. However, we follow Althea, whose only dream is to be a war sword, and these war swords are like these elite warriors that are granted like super strength essentially once they go through like this trial and this test. And Althea's stubborn. She's not willing to give up this dream of hers, even though they're like, you're a woman, you can't wield a blade. So she decides to prove to them all that she is good enough, and she gets help from Wilder Hawthorne to do that. And Wilder Hawthorne is one of the last war swords of the realm. The realm is in dire need of more war swords. And Wilder is very grumpy. If you like that like grumpy, brooding, probably a little traumatized male love interest, I think you will love Wilder Hawthorne. I really did. I really loved their scenes in this. This one is a little bit spicier than some of the other ones on this list, but not like super spicy. I think that there's some really interesting like creatures in this that come from that like shadow realm that we learn about, and I really liked the training aspect of this. So essentially Wilder ends up training Althea, so we see a lot of like training scenes if you like that trope. And I don't know, I liked the politics in this. I liked the side characters. So there's some really funny side characters in this on both sides. Like, Wilder has some good friends that I think are pretty interesting to follow, and Althea ends up making some pretty good friends that are very loyal, and there is like strong found family ties in this, as well as like a pretty epic world building as well. Like, this does like sprawl quite a bit. Like, there's some well put in thought into this world building. I would highly recommend. It is a quartet with a standalone, wink wink nudge nudge, that you might see that standalone later on in this list, because I love the standalone. Next up, Broken Bonds by Jay Bree. Who would have thought the Bonds That Tie series would to be on one of my lists. I think everyone was shocked when I loved this, but it's truly just a fun time read. Like, don't take it too seriously, but it just felt like really refreshing for me to read. Essentially in this world, you get bonded to people. You have your bonds, and when you bond with your bond, you get more power. It like makes you stronger. They're essentially kind of like fated mates, like they're specific people they're meant to be with, but it's like a wide shoe, so there's multiple bonds, and some people get to be like the bonded, obviously, and bond with like all of these people. So we're following our main character, who is one of those like bonded. When she finds out who her bonds are and how strong they are, she ends up running away because she realizes that like, I can't get stronger. I'm already too strong, too powerful, that like I will ruin the world if I get stronger. And so she runs away from them. That really pisses off her bonds, and they end up tracking her down, finding her, and essentially like not really keeping her captive. Like, she's not like locked in a cell, but they're not letting her go. Like, she is being tracked. If she like leaves the city, they're gonna come for her again, things like that. And so we watch her as she slightly like warms up to all of her bonded and ends up falling in love with them all. There's like just a lot of fun to this one. It kind of reminds me in a way of like a fantasy romance, billionaire romance, because one of our bonded is like really, really, really rich. And so we have like those mansions and like the nice cars and a boy on a motorcycle, and there's 5 love interests in this for you to fall in love with, and North is my favorite. I loved North, but I know that Knox gets a good amount of love. I think Griffin also gets a lot of love. There are like 5 different men, 5 different personalities. Someone will click with you. I really, really just enjoyed this. I thought it just made me smile and laugh, and I had a lot of fun reading it, and now it's on one of these lists. It's not fae. They do have magic, but there's a reason for them, but it's not fae. And in 5th spot, which I think is a lot farther down the list than some people will expect from me, we have Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I don't think this book needs really a shout out, but it is a not fae story that I really enjoyed. They have magic, and their magic comes from bonding with their dragons. So essentially the dragons have magic. Does anyone need a synopsis of this? Essentially we're following Violet, who is forced into the Dragon Riding Academy. She always wanted to be a scribe. She's grown up thinking she was going to be a scribe like her father, but her father is gone. He did. He passed away at some point. And her mother says, you can't let us down. You cannot do this to us. Your brother, your sister, and me are all well-known dragon riders. You have to be a dragon rider. She has a chronic illness where her bones are really weak, so it's harder for her than a lot of other people to just like get back up when she falls and things like that. Her mother makes her go to the dragon riding school where either you bond with a dragon or you die, essentially. So Violet's got a lot of work cut out for her. I think the story's so good because of her chronic illness. Like, we see Violet struggle and like rise again and again and again, and I felt that was really refreshing. Her chronic illness is not just like whisked away with magic. It's there the entire time. She has to figure out ways around it. She has to adapt and things like that. She doesn't just get to say a magical spell and it's gone. And I thought that was really refreshing because that happens a lot in fantasy stories. The dragons have such big personality in this. And I mean, our love interest is also key funky. It's little enemies to lovers. There's some training scenes in this one as well if you like the training scenes. And yeah, I don't think this needs more love from me, but I did really enjoy this. There's like crack in the pages. Like, I flew through this. I read this pretty much in one sitting. I did read it in one sitting. I stayed up till like 6 a.m. I told you you'd see the standalone. In 4th spot, we have Slaying the Shadow Prince by Helen Schuer. You can read this and not read Blood and Steel and be like perfectly happy. This wraps up in itself. However, these characters do show up in the Legend of Thesmar series. Recommended reading order, I think, is after 2. I read this first and then read Legends of Thesmar, but I think for emotional impact, people say to read it after 2 before 3. However, I read it first and I recommend reading it first because I just thought this was incredible and was really excited to see these characters show up because I read it first and I was just waiting for them. This one's like a prequel to the Blood and Steel series. We do see Wilder in this as well, but he's not like the main character or the main love interest. He's just a friend of our main love interest. And essentially in this one, we're following Drew, who is a noblewoman, but when her land is killed, essentially destroyed, her castle, her city, whatever, is destroyed by these shadow wraiths, she ends up wanting revenge, taking up weapons and deciding to fight. Although females aren't allowed to wield weapons in this world, this village is so far from the main land, and since she's technically one of the like ruling families, they get away with it because no one knows. She takes up the mantle that she is going to kill and destroy every single shadow wraith to ever exist. Insert our love interest, Talamir Starling, who shows up. He's a war sword of the realm. He's coming to deal with some problems that are happening in this village. He ends up helping them because he didn't realize that the shadow wraiths were so overwhelming there. The problem is that he has a secret. He's actually half shadow wraith, and when Drew finds this out, she knows she has to take him down, but first she will let him help her. And on this journey to help her, they maybe fall in love. You know, it's a romantasy book. But he's half shadow wraith, so what is she gonna do? Drew is feisty. Drew is the female character of my dreams. She is kind and considerate. She's passionate, but she can back up everything she says. She's no weak little chosen one character that like everything just seems to work out in the end because she's the chosen one. Like, she has some training to beat some people up, and I really, really enjoyed this. I thought the writing in this was perfect. I really enjoyed the smut in this. I think the smut is really well written. So yeah, I really recommend this standalone specifically. Even if you don't read Blood and Steel, read this standalone. It is my favorite. I gave this one 5 stars, and incredible, amazing. In third spot, we have Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. Another kind of god-like story. So in this story, we have a world where the gods came and they fell in love with humans. So the gods obviously had powers and stuff, and they were gonna live forever, but they realized they didn't want to live past their human counterparts. They didn't want to live without their like one true love in life, which is really romantic. So they end up tying their life to the humans that they fell in love with. So when the human dies, they also die. This ends up leaving their children, who are half god, half human, in charge of the world. As time has gone on, the Descended, that's what we call their children, have kind of thought themselves better than the humans. They have fallen out of this, like, the god and the humans fell in love and loved each other, and they kind of separate themselves as superior than the humans. But they, like, rule over the lands because they're obviously powerful and, like, live longer than humans. We follow our main character, DM, who is a human living in a village. She has been told one thing and one thing her entire life. Do not go near the Descended. Don't go anywhere near them. Don't go into a Descended camp. Nothing. Please don't even look at them. Her mother, however, is a healer, and she ends up actually helping the Descended quite often. She ends up being called to be the Descended healer because the Descended have magic, and when magic can't fix anything, they have to go to the humans because they're not smart enough to train healers themselves. But when her mother ends up going missing, the Descended are looking for a healer to come help them, and DM ends up going in their place. It's a bad idea. DM was told to avoid the Descended for a reason, and we're gonna find out what that reason is as she enters their castle into their city and makes some friends and makes some enemies. One of her friends and one of her enemies kind of being Luther, and Luther is... I love Luther. He is a softie. He is a doormat, but he is amazing. He's an amazing doormat. I did actually personally struggle with book 1. I did think about putting this lower on this list just because of that. Book 1 was a low 3-star for me. I actually think that this follows a lot of typical fae tropes. However, book 2 and book 3 were incredible. I gave them 5 stars. So I do love this series overall, and I would recommend it. And I think as the story goes on, we get away from some of those fae tropes, so I'm okay with it. And the world building gets really epic in this that I really, really enjoyed. So it's in number 3 spot for me. I feel like if you follow my channel well enough, you know the next 2, but just guessing what order they're in could be hard, but I'd love to know your predictions. In second spot, we have The House of Bane and Blood by Alexis Elmenard. I read this recently, and this so good, so refreshing to read. It's so different than anything I've read. There's no fae in this. They do have magical powers, and it's not really explained why they have magic, which I'm okay with. I find that a lot of times they're only called fae to have a reasoning for them to have magical powers. So I thought that this was refreshing that it just decided to not say anything. Like, it's a fantasy world. You want to give them powers, go ahead and do that. Like, we just randomly have dragons flying. We don't have to explain why there's dragons flying on this world sometimes. So this was refreshing to me. This is an urban story. It is set in a fantasy world. Like, it's not like urban in terms of like our world, but it's set in a city. So it's an urban setting. We're following a land divided into revenants who have magic and natives who are normal mortals and they don't have magic. The city is kind of divided. I think there's a river that goes through, and the revenants are on one side and the natives are on the other side. We follow our main character, who is an heiress to the most notorious family. She's doing all that she can to keep her family in check. They essentially own a train, and the train is one of the only ways to get goods into the city because there's water everywhere and rivers and things like that, and it's like far away. Thing is though, her brothers have put their company into debt, and so in order to save their company, Camilla ends up marrying someone. It's like an arranged marriage to get their money. She is originally supposed to marry one of the non-magic other families that is like rich, but she doesn't really want to. And when one of her enemies from the Revenant side comes and makes her a better deal, she cannot pass it up, and she ends up in an arranged marriage to him. Fast forward a little bit, she of course realizes that not all is as it seems, but the romance in this was swoon worthy. I cannot get over Nico, who is our main love interest. He is soft at heart, but like gruff exterior. Everyone thinks he's like this big bad, but then you go to his house and like he's the favorite child and everyone loves him, and his grandma's like baking him his favorite treats and things like that. And it's just so cute. Like, I loved this so much. I thought the story was really refreshing. The plot in this, I thought the family aspect of this was really well done. Like, I really liked a lot of the characters in this, and I loved that the conflict isn't necessarily between the two. In love, the conflict is more about the outside battling against them. And I really liked the arranged marriage aspect. I definitely should probably read a few more arranged marriages. I liked their banter a lot. I really, really loved this one. This is probably my favorite book of the year, so it deserved second spot on this list. Can you guess what first place is now? I feel like it's obvious. The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. I love this duology so much. Rain and Araya are truly, they have a special place in my heart. This probably made me fall in love with fantasy romance. Like, I liked it before I read ACOTAR and things like that, but I think in more recent years when I read this made me dive back into this genre as a whole, because I felt reinvigorated by this story. This is a vampire romance. They do have wings, so like in some aspects they're a mix between fae and vampires, but I still think it more leans to vampires. There are blood sucking. They just have wings, which like bats have wings, and you know, vampires used to be able to fly when they transformed into bats. Like, that's a big thing in the vampire lore, so maybe that's why they have wings. I'm thinking it through here. In this, we're following our main character Araya, who is a human that has been adopted by the Nightborn King. He is a vampire, and it was really weird for him to adopt a human. So she lives in a castle within the city that is ruled by vampires. She is constantly kind of fearing for her life because she's a human and she's just a lot weaker than these vampires, but she has learned to fight and has really like made herself more powerful in order to live in this city. However, the Kajari is upon us, and the Kajari is a tournament that vampires can enter. Anyone can really enter it. And if you're the last one standing, you get a wish from the night god, essentially. Araya decides she needs to wish for power. She needs to wish to be more powerful so that she cannot fear for her life all the time. So she enters the Kajari. But how is a human going to win against so many vampires? She has to team up with another vampire to get her through to the finals. His name is Rain. And Rain, I love Rain. Rain is so fun. He's something. And the story between them, I loved all their scenes together. There are trials in this, like the competition happens within like trials, and I thought the trials were fun. I like that they had like world building to them. I really enjoyed the story. It's a duology that will have more books following different couples, and we do meet the female of the next couple's story within this duology. There's also 2 standalones within this world as well that you can read, Six Scorched Roses and Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. Both of those are vampire romances, so also fit the non-fae, but like I recommend this. Like, this was my favorite. I love Rain and Araya. Like, this is my favorite fantasy romance, easily. Also, this has one of the best blood-sucking scenes. The cave scene in this. If you read it, the cave scene, so good. I'll eat that up any day. That's my top 10 non-fae fantasy romances. I would love some recommendations down below. I'm always looking for more. If you're looking to watch more fantasy romance content from me, here is a tier ranking video that I did last year, tier ranking all the romantasy that I read. And if you're not feeling chatty, leave me a red flag emoji of some sort down in the comments below, and have yourselves an absolutely remarkable day.